The Crescent Moon Club, in association with ABT, presents Omnibus Unlimited, a roundtable discussion of provocative subjects which must be addressed now. Radiovision for the 21st century. Hello again, everyone. I'm Laurence, Nobile, independent researcher and host of Omnibus Unlimited. Tonight, our topic for discussion is surviving an economic depression. With me to address this subject is Tom Murray, psychic healer and medical technician from the Columbus Medical Associates in Boston. Tom, thanks for being here tonight.
Good evening, Larry. It's nice to be here. We have a nice, cool evening, and we're in a beautiful setting in Dedham.
And of course, our producer and seeker of Omnibus Unlimited, John Horrigan. John, thanks for being here tonight.
Good evening, Larry. Thank you. Good evening, Tom.
Good evening, John.
Gentlemen, surviving in economic depression. This show comes almost literally on the heels of our last show about the impending depression of 1994. Tom, John, what would one need aside from money? Not that money would be of any value in an economic depression, but what would one need to survive an economic depression, and as such, is one really possible here in the United States?
Well, Larry, we have just been through several depressions. We have a lot of people aren't really aware of this, but the economic growth in the United States has not always been, since the founding of the United States, on a consistent basis. The United States received not only military leadership and ships from France during the Revolutionary War several hundred years ago, but we also received a huge infusion of cash. The French government sent money to the United States so that we could pay for troops, so that we could pay for the ships that we needed to buy outside of France, and to pay for food and supplies.
And why would they even bother doing that?
Well, the French were very interested in the American experiment, in which we believed that a country could be founded on the principles of truth, equality, and brotherhood. The French Revolution is actually, that's their theme. And the French people at that time felt a close parallel between what was going on in the mood in France and what was going on in the mood in the United States. They also didn't want to see the catastrophe that happened in France happen in the United States, in which you had anarchy, a government run by a few select people, and yet making it look as if the people were involved in the government, just like Tiananmen Square today.
So assuming that an economic depression takes a stranglehold on any country, and when I talk about or ask the question about how does one survive an economic depression, I'm not necessarily assuming that it would be an American family that would be trying to survive. It could be anybody on the planet. What would be the tactics one would use? What would be the tools one would need in order to survive? Any thoughts on that?
I think, Larry, first of all, and should I spill the beans? Because before we went on the air tonight, you told me some of these, but may I mention one?
By all means, go right ahead.
A gun, a weapon.
This would be a very important tool, I would think. You would need to protect whatever resources you have. What do you think, Tom?
I would say, let's go back to Atlantis. Atlantis and the island of Mu. I don't know if many people know what Mu was, but that's an island that was in the Pacific Ocean.
Lemuria.
Lemuria, often called that too, since the 1800s, were visited by large creatures called dinosaurs, and they often trampled the crops, knocked down houses, just like a herd of wild elephants have done sometimes in India today. The people, for safety, had to move and live in caves, and this became as you say, depression, a worldwide problem, and people traveled from many countries and had conferences in areas of Lemuria or Mu that weren't inhabited by these dinosaurs to figure out how can we control these? How can we keep these animals from being so active and so forth? One thing they set up was an early warning system with balloons, in which people in the balloons would see the path these animals were taking and people would get out of the way of them. I haven't seen the movie Jurassic Park, but the theme of Jurassic Park is the same thing. You have an animal with a low intelligence level but huge size, and it walks where it wants to walk. Human beings being much smaller and from a much more fragile ecosystem or survival system, we can't really deal with that turmoil as much. We need plants to live on. We need cattle that we herd. If they get destroyed or eaten and so forth, we ourselves can't survive. If you look at the American Indian, with the arrival of the white man, in which he would make crooked deals. Yeah, you can live here and then we'll take the land from you. The American Indian had to learn to survive, in which the Indians that lived in the forest and woods in the New England area became farmers and crop planters in the Midwest. And the American Indian often adopted his diet and his hunting and his eating habits to changing situations. And this is an economic, a social, and a psychological depression for the American Indian. One of the side effects of any depression for any group of people, rich or poor, weak or strong, is that you get mentally depressed because you really can't do anything about your situation. It's bigger than you are. Everybody is in it. It's as if we all fell into a huge well and nobody had a ladder. So one of the most important things to survive a depression is groupthink, working together as a unit, whether it's dinosaurs, whether it's another force invading us and pushing us back, whether it's global economic collapse in which every third person is out of a job, such as the Great Depression of the 1930s. What did people do? Those that were out of work tended to move back into families. A person might be 35 years old on his own, but he lost his job, so he moved back with mom and dad. Maybe his sister did too. And as we said on the heels of the previous show, and that the Depression has already started with the breakup of Russia and civil war in many sections of Russia, and the selling off of jobs in America to Mexico and other countries, and that's been going on for 20 years. And the impending and coming disaster in the stock markets around the world of London, Japan, and the United States, which I believe will happen within the next year. A lot of people are going to be caught short. Real estate collapses and banks. Historically, a great number of banks folded several years ago, or has everybody forgotten that? We are paying billions of dollars for savings and loan companies that folded. Why did those savings and loan companies fold? Because they were deregulated in 1980. They were deregulated in which they could invest in high-risk bonds, which are called junk bonds, in which they were forbidden to invest in since the Great Depression of the 1930s. We went broke in America because people were speculating with money. They thought for every dollar they put into the stock market, they'd get two back. And they were being told this by unscrupulous investment brokers.
And have the banks been re-regulated?
No, they haven't. In fact, new issue stock. In other words, if you started a business tomorrow and sold stock in it, formed new stock, it's never been on the market before, well, the new issue stock industry is being deregulated. So now you don't have as many safety controls. You don't have to print as much information about your business. You can lie a little bit more to the public to get their money. Usually, when a company sells money, that money goes to the people that run the company, not the people that work in it.
And so in a year or so, when the new stock issues are deregulated, then perhaps our own producer, John Horrigan, can start selling stock in the Crescent Moon Club.
It would probably be a wise investment. You know why? Because you get the truth and you get good advice here.
Hear, hear. Well, what about that, John? How about selling some stock in ABT and the Crescent Moon Club?
Absolutely. Anybody can join. We're EOE. What Tom was mentioning about the stock market and how we're very dependent upon what those numbers are, even though we don't think that it affects our everyday life. It's at 3,600. Imagine if it fell from 3,006. Here's a scenario for you, Tom. I'll pose this one to you. Stock market falls, say, from what was it, 34.50 today? Is that
Yes.
34.50, and it plummets to. Take me down the ladder. It plummets to 28, and give me the scenario there. If it plummeted down to 22, give me the scenario there. If it plummeted all the way down to 15, if you could give me the scenario.
Well, I'm not real good with figures in the sense that I tend to not memorize numbers, but I do memorize dates. 1987, the stock market crashed in 1987. The trade balance, the deficit was pretty bad. We were selling less overseas than we were buying from overseas. American dollars were leaving the country. The price of the dollar was strong, but it was being shored up by the International Monetary Fund, and over $1 billion worth of bonds, American bonds, were bought by Japan. There was a lot of Japan bashing going on in 1987, in case people have forgotten. And I said, you people don't realize it, but if Japan was not buying American bonds, the American bond market would be almost dead. It would be stagnant. And this is the long-term debt that the U.S. government was taking a chance on with low interest rates. This is why the bond market was slow. They were paying very small interest rates, but they were hoping to earn that money back through your tax dollars, folks, and which would go to people that don't bother working anyway and live in subsidized housing. But this was a whole system that the Japanese were buying up those bonds to keep the American dollar strong, because the major trading partner for Japan is the United States. If the United States stops trading with Japan, Japan's stock market goes belly up. I forget the figures there, but they're comparable to being, if you think that our figures say 3,600 now, there's the equivalent of, say, a 4,000 stock market figure now. Now, back in 1987, we were told that there was no way that a 3,000 line would be met. It was more like a line of 2,500. Of course, by 1989, we were hovering above 3,000. And again, we had the mini crash, which was called a stock correction, followed immediately by a lot of failed banks in Texas. And two things happened there. Number one, over-speculation in the stock market. And number two, a change in bank regulation. The 1980 bank deregulation made it so dangerous for banks that they started to go belly up, especially the savings and loans. Look, I'll tell you something. You give your aunt too much sherry and you don't know what she'll do. Now, when you have a bank business that's supposed to be conservative and safe and not take too many chances, and you have a bunch of people sitting around in a bank, which they're paid to do, and counting your pennies, and all of a sudden you show them where they can make 10, 15, 20% instead of 4 or 5, and they just simply get over-eager. I'll tell you another thing, folks. The people that they train in banks, they train when they're about 25 years old. I've never met 25 or 30-year-old people that lived through the Great Depression, or that lived through the Great Depression of 1973. They were about 4 or 5 years old then. So what did they know? Now, I remember getting out of the military in 1972, and I remember in 1973 sitting at the gas station to pay almost $1.50 for 1 gallon of gas, and you stayed in line for an hour. You about used a gallon of gas to get 1 gallon of gas. There was a major recession in the United States. The administration at that time did not call it a recession. However, folks, the economic definition of a recession is that when the gross national product, that means all the money made in the country, all added up, when the gross national product goes down for more than 2 semesters, and a year is divided up into 4 of them, when it goes down for more than 2 semesters, that's called a recession. Well, in 1973, the gross national product went down for 3 semesters in a row. That's 9 months straight. And that was not called a recession. Folks, if you ever studied economics or you read a book on economics, that's what a recession is by definition. And a recession is a less severe depression.
Well, certainly. And in any depression, a depression usually lasts from what, 1 to 2 to 3 years?
No, actually, it's more like a 7-year cycle.
7 years?
Yes. Think about it for a minute. Let's say you work for 10 years, and you work at an auto factory, and you're making $15 an hour now. And in 1973, the OPEC nations decide to strangle the United States, and they close down the supply of oil and gasoline to the United States. This is exactly what happened in 1973. The OPEC nations decided to get rich quick, and so they increased the price of oil to almost prohibitive prices for what already had been economically planned for industry. It's like yourself. You have an idea of how much you're going to make this year. You spend each month so much money on food, housing, on your car, and so forth. You don't go crazy wild one month and hope that you get lucky the next. You plan on an average yearly basis. Industry does the same thing. So when you have a 20 or 30% cost increase in one part of industry that has to be paid each month, such as perhaps transportation or fuel or paper goods. By the way, we had a big problem with that just before the 1970s with paper, in which the price of paper was changing every 3 days. And industry was sometimes backlogged for 3 months on electronic supplies and paper supplies because they didn't know what the cost of paper was going to be. That was around 1967, 68. But anyway, when the OPEC nations decided to strangle the U.S., the U.S. industry ground to a halt. People got laid off from their jobs. That factory worker, let's take that Buick factory out in Framingham. Man's earning $12 an hour as a car painter or polisher or whatever, and he loses his job. Collects 6 months unemployment, and at that time, that's all you collected. 6 months unemployment. Now he gets another job at $5 an hour. He's earning 1/3 of what he did. Now that Framingham plant only opened for about 2 years, several years after that, and then it closed again, and since then it's never reopened. And I know men that were working in that plant that have never gotten their income back up to $12 an hour. They might even be working for $8 or $9 now, but they were earning $12 25 years ago. I don't call that economic progress. I call that economic regression. That man's been living in a recession for 20, 25 years. And a lot of other Americans are there too. And I think the people out there on the radio listening to this that have had better paying jobs before know that. Another thing is, another way of lying to the American public, which was done very much in the 1970s by that administration, is the statement was made over the radio and on TV and to the press, the printing press, that the standard of living in the United States was maintaining the rate of growth as it was after World War II and in the 1950s, when the annual income of Americans tended to rise, and that the annual income, even basing for fluctuations in the dollar, was holding steady. Except for one thing. In the 1940s and 1950s, the average number of employed workers in a household, considered husband, wife, and 2 children, was one person, usually the father. Because during World War II, 40% of the workforce was female. But after World War II and the Korean War, women were encouraged to move back into the household. Women bought things like vacuums. A vacuum costs a lot more than a broom. They bought vacuums, washing machines, all kinds of what are called long-term goods, which boosted the manufacturing industry in the United States and made the United States #1 economic dominant power in the world. And this fueled our growth up until the late 1960s, early 1970s. But women were moved out of the work market and their jobs were taken over by men getting out of the military. After World War II, women that were in the workplace did not move out, after the Vietnam War, when the men came back from the Vietnam War, those jobs didn't open up for them. They came home to a recession, not to a growth economy, and a lot of those men have never gotten good paying jobs.
Well, a lot of those men were very young when they went over, as opposed to the Second World War when the
Yes.
average age was about 25,
The
even
average
closer
age,
to 30.
the average age in World War II, I believe, is 23 years old.
Yeah.
The average age for the Vietnam era war was 17.5.
Right, was very young. So the men in the Second World War left jobs to go to war. The boys in the Vietnam War had no jobs. when they left, so there were no jobs to come back to.
Yes, they moved
John,
back
you wanted to say
into a
something?
recession, and they were psychologically recessed too because they were told that they supposedly lost a war that they didn't lose. The United States never lost a battle in Vietnam. Every time we faced the enemy and fought the enemy, we won. But every time we took territory, we were told to give up the territory and move back. The U.S. government lost the war for the Vietnam soldier.
Well, that brings me to my question. How does one survive an economic depression? If I were tomorrow, Larry, the doors are locked in the banks, my savings account, I'm going to throw a number out of $671 I do not have access to, that I use the ATM. The ATM has been shut down. What do I need as far as material goods in order to survive a depression?
Well, certainly one would hope that you saw it coming before it came. Moments ago, you threw out the scenario of it's at 36, it hits 32, then it's 26, then it's 20. So hopefully you have some time. But to answer your question, certainly one would need a dependable car that they own outright. You need to get around these days. A car is not a luxury any longer. It is a necessity. Also a phone. You've got to be able to pay for that phone. Whether it's $30 or $40, you better keep that phone. The mail system just will not run the country anymore. You need a phone. You would need gardens in your backyard to help supplement your food. I know that my brother right now is growing several different varieties of food out back. He's not doing it for any impending depression that he's aware of, but this could come in very handy in a year or so. One would also need a network of friends. Absolute necessity is what Tom talked about not too long ago, coming together as a group thing, as it were. As we also talked about earlier, you need a gun, because there will be unscrupulous people who may come to take what is yours, because they don't have any and you do, and you don't have enough to go around. And as sad as it may be, it may have to come to that. This, of course, is only for individuals such as us who are not in government service, who are not the frontline people who are going to try and stop an economic war. Because as Tom was talking about earlier, economic depressions lead to psychological depressions. They lead to social depressions. They lead to all kinds of depressions, just starting
And
from
violence.
one. And so these are some of the basic needs. A car that you own outright, a dependable car with parts, certainly a large supply of oil to make the engine run. Where are you going to get the fuel? I don't know, because as Tom was talking about in 1973, we had a shortage of fuel, and I see that as being a very real possibility. So sure, I mean it's probably very illegal, but you'd have to store fuel of some sort. All of these things the average person would need: a garden, a gun, lots and lots of canned foods, dried foods, medical supplies, because hospitals are going to be doing things for free, and which means there's going to be less of them.
You're almost describing how to survive a nuclear holocaust.
Well, a nuclear holocaust is a depression of sorts. It's a war depression.
A nuclear holocaust, Larry, would just about wipe out what you think of as life as we know it, much like an alien invasion would do, much like, as you say, a great economic crash. For instance, I own a bicycle. I go to work on the bicycle. Doesn't use any fuel. Uses me. I'm the fuel. I'm also the engine. We also own our car outright. My wife saves her money very well. She makes sure there's money in the bank. There's always a cushion there. We own our house, and we pay off twice as fast as we have to our mortgage. The interest rates are very low right now. If you own a home, it might be a thought that if you have an older mortgage, say from the early 80s, where you're paying maybe 10% or 8%, and interest rates now are getting down to 6-7%, now might be the time to finance with a lower mortgage. perhaps take a 1-year adjusted rate mortgage where short-term interest rates are very low, and that 1 year from today's date, let's say, you're going to fix it at 7%. By the way, I have another prediction for you. My prediction is that interest rates, the prime rate, and therefore the interest rate on a home, will continue to decrease from now until the summer. Your major corporations are not announcing that they're making more money, that their profit margins are up, and that they're growing. They're announcing that, well, they're doing okay, or they're making a little bit of money. And the other thing that I haven't mentioned is they're downsizing. Downsizing does not mean you make the room smaller, the truck smaller, or the building smaller. You tell people, go take a walk. These people are becoming what we call underemployed, like the people that, as I said, came back from the Vietnam War or that were in the auto industry. People that had $20, $30, $40, $50,000 jobs are now working for 20 or 30% less money at some other job at a smaller corporation that might or might not survive a depression. Larry.
Well, I think, it's very interesting, and you bring up the point about paying off the mortgage on your house. Having a house is very important in a depression, although it is not at all the savior. Even if you own your house outright, you still have to pay taxes on that house. And if you do not pay taxes on that house, the property taxes, you will lose it to the town or city in which you live.
And I guess the house is no good without the utilities working.
Well, that's right, too. Although you can maximize the sun to its effect, we would become a different
Good
society.
idea, Larry.
For a while, we would become a different society, using electricity only during the day, changing our habits extremely so. But remember, if you don't own your house outright, you will lose it. The banker will come, and there is probably no chance of another Shays Rebellion where people band together and stop foreclosures. It's just not likely these days. You will be thrown out, you will become part of the angry mob, and then eventually, somewhere down the road, the bankers can have the military just massacre you, because angry mobs do irrational things because of irrational reasons. And so it's very important to have a house, a shelter, but that is by no means a savior, because the government can take the house from you at any time anyway. So
Larry, I agree with you with functioning of the government, because examples of that are recently in Waco, Texas, where a bunch of women and children were killed by actions of the U.S. government, and there's a cover-up there in which explosive gas was used. And I've had information from the Justice Department that the FBI is lying to the American people like they are about UFOs. You also have the Boston police rebellion of about 50 years ago, in which the Boston police went on strike, and they were attacked by the U.S. government.
And I think that's quite right, goes without saying, and very interesting. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or if you'd like to be a guest on Omnibus Unlimited, send your letter to Omnibus Unlimited, Box 577, Dover, Massachusetts, 02030-0577. I'd like to thank our guests for tonight's show, Tom Murray, psychic healer and medical technician from the Columbus Medical Associates in Boston. Tom, thanks a lot.
John, Larry, thank you very much.
And, of course, producer and seeker of Omnibus Unlimited, John Horrigan. John, thanks for the show.
Thank you, Larry. Tom, a pleasure listening to you. And Larry, some great ideas tonight.
Thank you, John. I'm Laurence Nobile, independent researcher and host of Omnibus Unlimited, saying thank you for your attention, good night, and good luck. Omnibus Unlimited is a production of ABT. Omnibus Unlimited, Radiovision for the 21st century, which spotlights the bizarre, the occult, the paranormal, anomalies, the supernatural, and the unconventional. Metaphysics at its best. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or if you'd like to be a guest on Omnibus Unlimited, send your letter to Omnibus Unlimited, Box 577, Dover, Massachusetts, 02030-0577. Omnibus Unlimited is a production of ABT and the Crescent Moon Club.